Pagitt here. We're coming later to you in the day on this particular Wednesday. We talk about issues of faith and the common good on Wednesdays because I'm privileged to speak with Shane Claiborne today. And this is the time that works.
Yeah.
So, hey, y'all, and glad that you all could join us for this. I'm speaking to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Shane, you're in Philadelphia today. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. City of Love. Yep.
Well, love you from the city of love. We ask people to share with us their location, where they are in the chats, and all of those things. So please, friends, take a minute and do that. Let us know where you're from, where you're coming from. Shane, you were able to be in Nashville a day ago, 2 days ago, for the faith march of people of good conscience and common good faith, asking for attention to be raised at what the legislature in Nashville did by expelling Justin Pearson and Justin Jones from the from the legislature because they didn't approve of the way they protested. And there was a they've since been reinstated into that role, but that doesn't unravel what happened, that they were expelled. So I wanted to catch up with you and have you tell us what was going on there in Nashville and how it all went down and all that.
Yeah, man. Well, I was in Canada, so I had to do those all night flights, reroute, miss one and finally get down there just in time. But it was so important to try to get down there, right? So I mean, this is my home state too, Doug. This is where I was born and raised in that land of Dolly Parton, and
You're a Tennessean.
yes, and it's a state I love. Even though I've been in Philly for a couple of decades, I still have a lot of love for that state and a lot of concern for it. You've been on the marches we've done around the death penalty, and the March for Mercy we do from
Mm-hmm.
the death row to the Capitol, and that's one of the ways I got to know Justin Jones over the last few years. We also, in Tennessee, this is important backdrop, right? Because we had the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, one of the founders of the KKK, in the Capitol until just
Incredible.
2 years ago, and it took massive organizing, and of course, Brother Justin Jones was in the forefront of that. Encampments at the People's Plaza there outside of the Capitol. So this is not a moment, but a movement, in Tennessee that's been happening and it's going to keep
Mm-hmm.
happening. But this was a really um, important gathering, I think. I mean, you think of these places like Nashville. They become kind of a mirror to the rest of the country, and it's sort of the eye of the storm in some ways at this current
Mm-hmm.
time. And on so many fronts, I mean, there's the death penalty, gun violence, the attack on LGBTQ folks, healthcare. I mean, so many different things that are at stake right now in Tennessee, and that's why we gathered in solidarity with the Tennessee Three, with Justin and Justin
Nice.
and
Nice.
Representative Gloria.
Did they
And
were
yeah,
they part of the walk or the march as well that you all did, or did they meet you there at the Capitol? What
Justin
give us
was.
a
He
little
was one of the
picture.
first folks I saw there, and we got to catch up a little bit. But it was really clear too that they themselves have said this is not just about them. This is a
For
lot
sure.
bigger than them. So they weren't
For
really
sure.
the center of attention. But we sure celebrated them. We laid hands on Justin. I mean, that's one of the other things that's really beautiful about all this is these are folks fueled by their faith. Deeply rooted in their love for Jesus and their faith, that are concerned about so many of these issues that
Yeah.
we should prioritize. Yeah, man.
Yeah, and you've had a chance to know Justin Jones for a while. He was part of the walk that you mentioned, the March for Mercy that we did. He was there. I had a chance to meet him briefly. Such a sweet spirit and strong countenance and clear like watching him on the news, seeing him now, in the role of the legislator who was expelled from the legislature. It's easy to create a vision or a picture of who a person is, and it's accurate. That is who he is. I felt like, well, yeah, that's the guy. But he's also much more than that, right? He wasn't just that character. Can you say anything about the work you've done with him and all that, because I think it helps people to humanize and personalize these issues, right? When they realize, oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. These are just people getting along and trying to make their way in the world to create some goodness themselves that find themselves caught
Yeah,
up in all that.
yeah. I mean, so I just one of the kindest, sweetest souls, and will show up every
Yeah,
time. Is not a single issue person, but just deeply concerned. And it's important that he has roots at Fisk and studied theology. He comes out of this uh, liberation. Um, Good news to the poor version of Christianity, and that's why all these old guys in the house are really twisting scripture to uh, to kind of camouflage their bigotry and stuff, and
yeah,
and Justin, throws it right back. He centers Jesus when the legislature was criminalizing homelessness, literally making it a felony charge
yeah,
to sleep in the public plaza. um, I remember him just going up and talking to these guys fearlessly, um, but in his very kind souled manner, going, "You claim to follow Jesus. What would Jesus do?
yeah.
Like,
Nice.
when you do it to the least of these, you do it unto me. Just recently quoted Isaiah, "Woe to you who pass unjust laws that deprive the poor of their rights." So I think it's great, to see someone that's deeply committed to their faith that's offering a different narrative. And yeah, so we've gotten to know each other. He wanted me to make him a cross out of a gun barrel, so I've made him a cross, and I just sent a message to Justin Pearson that I just finished his cross today,
Yeah,
and so I have nothing but respect for them. I don't know Justin Pearson as well, just because he's from Tennessee's a long state, so Memphis is a little ways. I haven't had the privilege to spend as much time with Justin Pearson, but you still see that deep faith that they're grounded in, and I'm so
well,
um,
and people should know,
energized, man. Yeah.
and people should know, folks don't just randomly ask someone to make a cross out of a gun barrel. That's something you that is something you do, right? That's a project, a particular project that that you do. So I would love to talk about that. Do you have one right there? Can
I
you
do
have one
have
to
one.
show?
Well, because I had mine. Reverend Barber. We'll get back to the event, but Reverend Barber always says, "Be conspicuous. Don't be inconspicuous." But
Nice.
so this is. I can't. I don't have the ordination and all that, Doug. So I can't wear the collar and all.
I
But I
hear
can
you.
wear
I hear
this,
you.
and this is my um, attire. So that's my cross made out of the barrel of a gun,
Yeah.
and I made a very similar one for. Both the Justins, and I'm going to send Gloria a heart, I think. But that's what we've been doing. But some of this is, this is about um, the politics of death, and there's so many folks in Tennessee that talk about being pro-life, but it's so narrowly thought
Yeah.
of that in terms
Yep.
of abortion that on all these other issues, they're actually the obstacles of life. And that's why at this event, Justin Jones and others of us, Reverend Barber, and uh, Dr. Vonetta West from the King
Hmm.
Center, all kinds of red letter Christian folks. We had like 50 people that came. So we were there and we carried these coffins. Some of them were the size of a child, purposefully to remember those children that were killed recently in the mass shooting in the school, but also to think more broadly about um, the policies that Tennessee is passing or trying to sustain, that are hurting so many people.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of lives at stake.
Yeah. And look, so let's talk a bit about that, because I want to hear more about what happened at this event. But talk about, as an organizer and as a faith leader, why you believe that these kinds of public displays, rallies, marches are important. You've rattled off a few you've been a part of. We've organized a number of them together. We're sort of into that stuff and around here at Vote Common Good. But I know there's a lot of people who are trying to understand, like, why and what comes from that, and what's the how does it fit into a larger story. If it's one tile in a mosaic, what's the picture of the mosaic that we're creating with each of these moments becoming a part of a movement, that kind of theory. Can you talk a bit about that? Why do this event, and of any style, and because so many issues, right? You're like, just in Tennessee, as you named, in the last month, there's been, a mass shooting, and that caused people to rally up, and students, and walk to the Capitol, and we've walked there for the death penalty, and this walk to the Capitol. Um, share a bit about why it makes sense, and how you keep going when it can feel like it's just demonstration after demonstration with no, actualization of the changes that we see, or at least not in the kind of level that, or the speed that we'd like to see them.
Well, there's a real historic precedent in all this, like Dr. Martin Luther King, and I mean, even in other countries, I think of the Children's March in Soweto, like all the
Mm-hmm.
the marches and rallies that led to the end of apartheid, or we see like and lots of different manifestations, over the decades. Um, the Selma and Dr. King, one of the things that he said is that one of the things that we've got to do is expose injustice so that it becomes so uncomfortable that people have to respond. And one of the ways that we did that this week in Nashville was we centered the people who have been directly impacted by these deadly policies. I mean, literally, a mom whose kid went to Covenant School. I mean, just wrecked. I mean, the tears, the groaning, the grief
Yeah, can
of
hardly think
that,
of it.
and these young people, the students who have some of them been survivors of shootings. There was one church that had an active shooter that came into the congregation. So that's really what it's at the heart of these movements, and the Poor People's Campaign in particular is all about centering the people who have been directly impacted. But then we also have like people of faith, because that's what Dr. King said. The church is not meant to be the master or the servant of the state. The church is meant to be the conscience, to be this real prophetic conscience. And so at one point, there's thousands of people. Reverend Barber asked everybody that's a pastor or clergy or faith leader to stand, and it felt like almost half the room. I mean, there were hundreds, and that's encouraging because we often hear voices in the media that do not represent our faith or Jesus very well. And so it was beautiful to see all of these different, many of them Christian, but also, imams, rabbis, and lay folks from all different
Yeah.
traditions joining forces, man, and standing up for love. And so we marched with the coffins. We had a rally with the angelic voice of Yara Allen leading us in song and freedom songs. And then, of course, we did non-violently, but passionately go into the Capitol, as a part of the event too.
Yeah. Um, Yabbits, who's in our regular commentator here on the YouTube channel, has a great point. He says, "Pardon me for pointing this out, but there seems to be a very wide gap in the Christian community over these issues, and not only the particular topics, but even specifically over this particular circumstance." And I, I think Yabbits is right. It's not as if there's one opinion about this, and that's why I think these demonstrations are important. I think it's to try to make clear to people that there's a variety of voices, and a lot of people only hear from those who they agree with, right? We all find ourselves guilty of that, right? Tuning in to the people whose phrases and voices and ideas we like, and
Yeah, and this is
finding it
nothing
more
new,
difficult with other ones.
Yeah, I mean, we've had these competing narratives of Christianity for a long time.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think of the words of Frederick Douglass when he said, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I
Mm.
recognize the widest possible difference, and then he goes on to point out that,
Nice.
you can't help but reject the slave holding, women whipping, cradle plundering Christianity of this land, if you're going to embrace the
Nice.
beautiful Christianity of Christ. And I think there's, as our friend Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove points out, the slaveholder religion and the liberating religion of the enslaved people. So, like, even now, I think we see versions of Christianity that are in conflict
Yep.
and
Yep.
with each other. And I mean, the group that we connect through a lot, Doug, Vote Common Good, but also Red Letter Christians. Our name was born in
Yeah.
Nashville when, this guy said, I sometimes get confused by the Bible. There's parts I like, there's parts that I'm confused by, but I always like the stuff in red talking about,
Nice.
the words of Jesus. And so I think that's where we also we don't want to surrender Jesus to the people that seem to have really distorted our faith, in the same way that people have tried to distort other faiths too. So it's beautiful to be a public, visible presence that is actually proclaiming the things that Jesus said. When we welcome the stranger, the immigrant, the refugee, we're welcoming Christ. When we care for the sick and provide health care for people that need
Yeah.
it, we're caring for Jesus. So that was one of the things I said, Doug, is in the little 2 minutes that I had, I said, when I was growing up in the 1990s in Tennessee, we had, bracelets and bumper stickers that said WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I said, it might sound a little cliche, but if every legislator in that Capitol that goes to church on Sunday morning um, ask that question. And we don't have to speculate what Jesus would do. We know what Jesus did. He protected children.
Yeah.
He stood up for the poor. He blessed the those that mourn and the merciful and the peacemakers. He
Yeah.
interrupted an execution. So you just can't defend the death penalty and guns over kids and all of these just absurd things if you take Jesus seriously.
Yeah. And look, it's complicated for people because we don't want the legislature of any state, at least I don't, and I don't want the federal legislature to be doing Christian theology and work, right? They need to have guidance from a broader spectrum than just Christianity. But if there are legislators who are claiming that they're making laws and setting standards based on their faith, that needs to be critiqued and needs to be countered when it's clearly not the case. How do you think about that difference, right? Like the motivation of a legislator versus the job of a legislator when it comes to these kinds of implementing of the faith that legislator holds.
I think there's some things that are that I mean, I guess one of the things I keep coming back to is a scripture, but it's also, I think, a universal principle, which is that there's that place where the New Testament says, "Perfect love casteth out fear." And I think every legislator, regardless of their faith,
Yeah.
should be asking, what does it look
Yeah.
like for love rather than fear to
Nice.
be the motivating force that's kind of shaping how I think about this. And I mean, that's certainly something that we've been all about with, at
Yeah.
Vote Common Good, is choosing love over fear. But to love, over and over, Jesus in scripture says, everything's summed up into this: love God, love your
Yeah.
neighbor. So I think, particularly for those that do claim to be Christian, that if that were the kind of overarching framework that we're thinking about, how do we welcome immigrants, where do guns play into this,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really helpful one. And I think that helps us find some common ground too, if we go, hey, we're driven by love, let's figure
Yeah.
this out.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is, there's a lot of people that are not driven by love. They're driven by fear. They're driven by um, a sense of clinging to power,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think those things become really dangerous.
Yeah. Power and profits is often a real bargaining chip, a swap chip for love. There's no doubt people that. I'll commend to people the Love and Politics pledge that we have on the Vote Common
Yeah.
Good website. They can go over to Vote Common Good, saying that because love isn't owned by any group, it's not owned by any person, it's not owned by any religion. We're all in that, right? We're all yeah, it's something we're all into. And at the same time, and Shane, we've had to have a lot of conversations with people who oppose the kind of views that we want to share. I know people who say, well, yeah, the way we want to keep children safe is to give guns to teachers, right? So we want to protect children, but we want more guns to protect children. The way we want to help the poor is to get them off of the social welfare system so they can be hardy, participants in the capitalist system as a worker or as an owner, and so get them off of a social safety net. The way we want to protect the planet is to, like sometimes people have the same goal or they'll state it, but their position for accomplishing that goal is Freaky Friday opposite day, right? Like the thing that
Yeah.
to me seems like it's the clear solution is to limit the amount of deadly weapons that people are carrying around. Most of the country is moving the other direction. Most state legislatures are passing laws to give people more access to deadly weapons in more places at more times.
Yeah.
Just bonkers. So we're not only arguing about do we want to protect kids, but what protects children? And we're not only arguing about what, how do we stop harm being done, but we're arguing about the means by which we're going to stop harm being done. So it's not only a moral call. There's actually a tactical call in there, or like no, it's we need to do different things, not just hold different priorities. Do you think so, or how do you think about any of that stuff?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack, but I think that one of the things that we heard down in Nashville was that this Covenant school that was the most recent. Actually, not even anymore. It's not even the most recent, but for the catalyst for this particular conversation, they had everything. They had all the security. They had all the drills. They were prepared for an assault rifle shooter to come in, and yet uh, here we are again, and it really does kind of feel like um, saying more guns are going to solve our gun problem feels kind of like an alcoholic going, I need more whiskey. This is really bad, like
Yeah.
that. I heard someone else saying, if your dentist office, the bathroom blows that starts leaking everywhere. He doesn't say to the nurse or the dental hygienist, hey, could you go take care of that? There's everybody's got a responsibility in this, and the
Yes.
idea that we're going to also make teachers in charge of emergency response with
Yes.
armed weapons. I mean, police are bad enough with weapons. So I think that this is this is people are saying it loud now. This is about guns, right? When people say it's not a gun problem, it's a heart problem, I always affirm that there is a heart problem. There's a violence
Totally.
obsession in our culture. But what is unique about America is our access to weapons that can do so much damage. And that's why we keep seeing these shootings. I mean, more mass shootings than there have been days of 2023. And also, like, these mass shootings, as horrific as they are, where 4 or more people are shot, we've had 150 of them, they're less than 2% of our
Yeah.
gun deaths. And so this is, and Tennessee's one of those states that just keeps getting looser and looser gun laws, and somehow is surprised that now, this is recent, now guns are the number one cause of death of children in Tennessee and throughout the country. I mean,
Yeah.
and so that's why you go, you can't be pro-life and ignore gun violence. Like we've got to do something.
Yeah, and that includes what you're getting at. That includes suicides and family domestic violence situations. That's how children are most killed by guns, right? It's mass shootings, yes, but not only. So there is a serious problem, and this isn't a conversation about guns, but we should continue to have those, right? Because we've done some others, but I want to stay on this for a moment
Yeah,
because,
totally.
um, look, I get it that people say we can't. Um, you can't only blame the gun that a person is involved in shooting the gun, and that's true. The number of people who are harmed by self-firing weapons is rather low, right? Most of the time it's someone who's shooting the gun on purpose. But as a society, we know that it takes two, a shooter and a weapon, to make that damage happen. The thing we're not going to do is get rid of people, and we're not going to solve for mental illness in the foreseeable future. So if there's
Yeah.
two parts of the problem and one part's not solvable, that leaves the other part to be solvable. And it's a little shocking that people simply say, we won't do anything about one half of the two-part problem.
Yeah, and
It's
you know there's also an important thing that I've learned the more I've studied this too is that mental health is of deep concern, and that's why we should care about better resources for it. But someone who struggles with mental health is more likely to be a victim of violence than to be a perpetrator of it. And every country in the world has folks that struggle with
That's right.
mental health, that even people that are like just filled with hatred want to kill people, like, but what's unique about our country is allowing the capacity that someone can do that, right? And so I think there's also a role that technology has, where like fingerprint technology on guns. If there was some kind of fingerprint technology, we have the capacity to do this. I mean, we operate a lot of other things off fingerprints.
Yeah.
If a kid found a gun in the house, if a gun was stolen, um, someone else than the gun owner was maybe thinking of taking their life, it just make it a little harder. And that's what I think. We should be putting all of our minds on this and
That's
not
right.
having these false dualisms that this is policy or this is technology or this is about culture. It can be all those things. So
Yeah.
let's put our heads together on it, And that's where Dr. King too, he had a great line, he said, a law can't make you love me, but it can make it harder for you to kill me.
That's
So
a great line. Yeah.
let's make it harder to kill,
Yeah.
right?
I was just somebody. I was just saw something recently about one of the iconic bridges. I think maybe the Golden Gate Bridge, and there was a real problem where people were suiciding off of the
Yeah.
Golden Gate Bridge. So what they did was put up barriers to make that more difficult. This
Yeah.
point that you're making, right? Because that's the reasonable thing you would do if you knew that there was a particular means by which people in emotional decisions that they and others will could or would regret, to make that system, to make actualizing the suicide through that means more difficult. We
Yeah.
don't
I
seem to
mean,
do
and
that
maybe,
with weapons. We
right.
leave it as we make it more possible for that to happen. I mean, walk by nearly any walking bridge, and they make it difficult for someone to fall off accidentally or to fall off intentionally, because that's what you do. You take a dangerous thing and you make it more difficult for harm to come from it. And why
Yeah.
we can't seem to get there around the weapons in this country is an actual choice that we don't, to this point, seemingly want to change. People are generally putting up with it enough where, you know, we're we're unwilling to make the changes that would need to be made. And I'm not sure everybody agrees on all the changes that should be made, right? And certainly don't agree with the position I have, which is, on the more make them extraordinarily difficult for people to get and only usable in certain circumstances and situations. That would be my take on it. I know other people have really different understandings of it.
Yeah. I mean, just I think one more thing on the suicide, because it is over half the gun deaths or suicide. And so when we think about guns and access to guns are a huge deal because they're so unforgiving. You don't get a second chance.
Mm.
90% of people, is more than 90%, that attempt suicide with a gun die. But here's what's interesting is, just like you said, when there's other methods that someone tries to take their own life, most of the time they survive. 80% of the time, 90% of the time they survive, and they don't die by suicide. They're able to get help. They're able to
Yeah.
rethink the crisis. And that's why, in veterans, people talk about veterans, the veteran suicide
Yeah.
rate is twice that of the population. The biggest cause of death of veterans is suicide. And so all of these things, like, let's be advocates of life and guns. Where there are more guns, there are more gun deaths. And it just shouldn't surprise us. There are more gun suicides.
Yeah, so true. All right, so we didn't even bring this. I didn't even ask if you want to talk about this, but you did write a book about this stuff that just came out, and we haven't had you on the podcast yet to talk about the book. So here's a freebie for that conversation. It's called Rethinking Life, Embracing the Sacredness of Every Person. You get after this issue in guns in this book, but you've also written elsewhere about gun circumstance in the United States. What do you want to tell us about this particular book, though, that's newly out just in the last few weeks?
Yeah, I didn't really know we were going to do all that, but
I didn't either,
I
but
mean,
you know, as
when
long
we're
as
in
we are.
Nashville, yeah, I mean, this is all really connected, and in so many ways, it's. Uh, I wrote a book about guns, beating guns. I wrote a book about the death penalty, executing grace. But the fact that so many folks that say they're pro-life are actually the biggest supporters of guns and the biggest supporters of the death penalty, and really an obstacle to life on so many other issues. That's part of why I wrote this, new book, because it kind of zooms out a little bit from the issues and is about what does it look like to have a better foundation
Yeah,
for our thinking on all these, that is all about love and a concern for people who are made in the image of God. And so, I mean, in some ways, that's why it's very related to Tennessee.
yeah,
The fact that we still have the electric chair, that we're still actively executing people, and it's being done in places. Some of the most deadly policies in America are in the Bible Belt and in states where Christians are governors and legislators and are championing policies that I think betray the very heart of Jesus. And as you point out, it's also beyond Christian faith. Like, they're just really terrible policies. They really hurt the most vulnerable people in our land. I mean, it's no surprise that Tennessee's also suffering on other fronts like healthcare and education and
yep.
these things too, man. Yeah.
Yeah, look, and I think it's super helpful. People are thinking differently about these issues, or they're thinking newly about these issues, or they're thinking again about these issues. And very often people need new inputs in order to think differently, right? This is something that preachers have known, psychologists know, counselors know. You have to break the pattern of your thought to think new ways. And one of the ways that some people break the pattern is to take in new ideas. So when someone says, "Oh, I've been thinking about issues of how we have a culture of a life-giving culture," or what we say around our world, that we want to curate life wherever we can find it, and we want to be championing it. But I can't use the old ideas I had about that, because the previous ideas I've had have gotten me to this point, right? I need some
Yeah.
fresh ideas and some fresh perspectives. So that's why uh, all of these moments open up the window for people to say, "We need to think differently about this." Like the number of people I know who have said,
Yeah.
I haven't thought one day in my life about state legislators. I mean, I couldn't name my own state legislator. I've probably voted for some because they're probably on the ballot, but I don't know who they are. I don't know how many there are. I don't think about state legislatures until two guys get kicked out of the state legislature in Tennessee, and then they're like, "What? You expelled two
Yeah.
black legislators when three people did the same thing, or seemingly the same thing?" And one of them was a white woman and two were black men. And all of a sudden people are finding themselves like, "Hey, this legislator or legislature, what's the word we use? Do we use, like, literally people I've been in conversations with aren't sure if it's
Yeah.
legislature or legislator, right? They're brand new to talking about this stuff, so they're having to think new. And then that brings them to thinking about guns, and then they're thinking about other policies. So talking about, this book that you have out, which is great, is not just like pitching a book. It's really reminding people that there's help out there, and there's some new ways to think about some things, and there's new conversations that you can be in with people in your life, because we're all thinking about this stuff in new
Yeah.
ways, right? It's
Totally.
society's moving on these issues, and we can't keep thinking that we know enough already to answer, the call of this current moment.
I think a lot of people are tired, a bit exhausted of the political camps and the partisan, kind of paralysis of the two parties and stuff too. And that's why, Reverend Barber often says that a lot of these things are not about left and right; they're about right and wrong. And at this march and at all the Moral Mondays marches that they've had in North Carolina, they actually don't have any politicians that speak from the
Mm-hmm.
stage. Even at this one, neither of the Justins or Gloria or any of the politicians spoke. It centered the people who have been impacted. And faith leaders that led in prayers and things like that. But it was really around those who have been um, suffered, from the brunt of these policies. And I think that makes a huge difference, because it's hard to
Yeah.
argue with people's stories, and we're not going to argue people into thinking differently. But I think if we can move people in their hearts, if someone can be moved by another person's pain, this mother of the elementary school kid, it just goes, this, I've had enough, like I want to do something differently. So I think that's what these public demonstrations do, but they also embolden us, right, Doug? It's easy to feel like you're alone in your in your fatigue, in your cynicism, in your exhaustion, right?
And so
when
in your
you come
basement
together,
talking to the internet could be a little lonely feeling. There's
I mean, you got hundreds of people, and courage is contagious, right? Like
Yes.
the courage that Justin and Gloria showed, the courage of Kaepernick as he kneeled, the courage of Rosa Parks, that's contagious.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
just like fear is contagious. So I think we want to keep that momentum, emboldening folks, and part of the reason that we call it a moral Monday, or a moral movement, is because this is about right and wrong, and we don't want groups that have called themselves the moral majority to and yet have so many contradictions in the values that they hold. We want to say there are some things that are about right and wrong, and this isn't about partisanship. In fact, you and I have had plenty of critiques of Biden, and I think of some of the things that he could be doing to be a little bit more pro-life on the death penalty and immigration, and you name it. So this, but to stand together and say we're standing, alongside our brothers and sisters and our family and siblings that are hurting right now. Like that's what this is about. It's about solidarity, and it's not about partisanship. And I think that's moving people. I mean, I was encouraged, dude. Yeah, I don't know if you saw Amy Grant, and several other. We had her going public on the death penalty at one point, and
just about
almost. And then she's standing up on gun violence. We're working on Michael W. Smith, but I got a message from Kevin from DC Talk, right? Toby, Mike, and Kevin. You remember that? Like he's still making great music, but he's in Nashville. He's like, I'm in. So there's people that are getting courage, that are thinking new things, and all of us are not the same person we were 10 years ago. So I think it's never too late to do right.
Shane, I don't think I've talked to you since I was infected by a really great notion, an idea that hit me about 2 weeks ago. I made a little video and stuff about this, but it was this statement from a presenter where he said, look, when you're doing significant kind of cultural shift, like we're doing in the United States and happens around the world and is a continuous process, or in a family or an organization or anything, but this kind of shift, rarely do you get to a place where you can say we're going to have a future built on a shared narrative, because our narratives come from our backgrounds, our narrative comes from our worldviews. So we're not going to get to the point where we're going to share a narrative, all agree on the same set of facts, ideas, and dreams, and that will be our future. He said, but what we can have is not a I got to get this right, not a shared narratives of the future, but a shared sort of love. Now I messed it up in my head. I got myself all turned around. Sorry. So we're not going to have a narrative. This is great. This is great podcast material, right? We're not going to have a narrative. We're not going to have a shared. We're not going to have a shared narrative of a future, but we can have a shared. We can have a narrative of a shared future. There we go. We can have a narrative that says we have a shared future. So we're not going to agree on the same future, but we can say whatever our narrative is going to be, we're going to all be sharing the future together. We're in this thing together. And that's something that we have to get to, right? We're not going to get there on any of this if we continue to say some of us are going to win, some are going to lose, and the winners are going to have the spoils. And the rest of you, you're out. Like the truth of it is, we're going to live in a world where people disagree on really important issues. So what we need to be talking about is how do we live in that shared world? Because the world that we're living in now, it's not working for everybody. but we're not going to end up in a world where, which you get in politics a lot. So a lot of the political wrangling is like, we're going to take back America, right? I hear people on both political sides wanting take back and war and fight language. And if we keep doing this sort of tug of war with who controls, we're just going to end up with sore hands, sore legs, and a stalemate of frustration. So we
Hmm.
have to have some kind of a narrative of a shared future, even though we don't have a shared narrative of what the future is going to look like.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we've got to have is this belief that truth sets us free, and even the
Yeah.
hard truth, and that's why we've been together with Brian Stevenson, and when he talks about we can't get our future right until we get our history right. That some of this is about
Yep.
telling the truth about how we got here.
Yep.
Right. And when we live in denial of that, it's just like, I mean, in the church, we believe that confession is healing. Like, you've got to confess your sins, and that's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of something new. But
Yep.
as long as you continue to bury those, and you cover up your secrets, and you like, all that stuff holds you hostage, right? And in some ways, that's what some of this is about too. I mean, it's no coincidence that, I mean, literally, one of these first fights where I met Justin Jones was with the this Confederate statues, these monuments to people
Crazy.
who were absolutely on the wrong side of history. I
Yep.
mean, we've been better at preserving Confederate monuments than protecting Black lives. And it's like 9/11. You don't remember 9/11 by putting up statues to the terrorists, like, that's not how we remember history,
Yeah.
like, you go to you go to Germany, you don't have statues of Nazis, you have all these memorials. And I think, and not just seeing folks as victims, but seeing like the true, like, the beauty and the contributions of Native and Black and brown skinned folks, like, throughout history, like, so that we can tell the truth about who we are, because that's what some of this is really about. I mean, it's why folks are saying we don't want to teach about Martin Luther King in our schools. We want to ban these books. I mean, that's happening in Tennessee, and
Yep.
it's very related to this. Folks that say make America great again, they're wanting to go back rather than go forward. So yeah, it's but that's why there's a generational piece to this that's so important, right? There's a race piece to it. I mean, it's no coincidence that the two Black legislators were kicked out and the white one was Gloria Stage. She said that herself, but they're also young. These guys are 25 years old. I think when he won, the guy that he was running against had been in office longer than he had been alive.
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
So there's this, like, youthfulness, right? And that's what's energizing. Many of these folks fueled by their faith, and not letting, old folks that have distorted our faith get in there. So there was a youthfulness in Nashville. The young people are tired, right? They're fed up with the, like, excuses and the thoughts and prayers without action. So on the environment, on gun violence, the Black Lives Matter movement, you name it, like, it's young people that are leading the way. So I'm pumped.
Yeah.
I think it's a great
Well,
time.
I, I will joyride on your enthusiasm about that, because I'm jaded enough to believe that in the 1960s people were saying the same thing, and 55 years later you have that same generation who are the ones in the way. So I'm not entirely sure that simple generational shifts are going to get us here. I think we're going to need some additional adjustments to just waiting on the next generation to find themselves in leadership. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't
I
think that we can
I'm
wait
heart
for this stuff to
I'm
age
heart
out.
heavy about first of all, I don't want to wait that long, and secondly, I'm not entirely sure we should trust that whatever any generation is going to hold fast to it. I'm not sure we have a culture that is creating a system by which we're like, I think in 50 years it's probably going to have worked itself through the system. Who
Yeah,
would have
I
thought
mean,
in 1970 we'd be here right now?
yeah, I definitely think that that we don't wait. I think we one of my mentors said, there's a scripture that says good things come to those who wait upon the Lord. He said that's true sometimes. It's also true sometimes that good things come to those who get off their butts and get organized. So I think we need a little bit of both. Yeah.
Blessed are the organized. Yeah. Uh, No, I think that's right. And look, because we all have to do it, and it's good that a younger generation is stepping forward, and because it really is all of us. Like that, I am more convinced than ever that we're not going to get there by empowering one small set of us. We have to find a way for as many of us as possible in this country to join together, and sometimes that means not being as comfortable with all the people that we're working with or all the outcomes that we're going to get. There's something about human life that requires give and take and to and fro and compromise and finding a way. And where we are right now feels, look, I help run an organization that really does not want one particular party to continue to have political power until it comes to its senses and apologizes for its behavior over the last 10 years. Like, I'm really committed to that. So, a little rich for someone like me to be suggesting, right, that it's going to take all of us. So I'm all for accountability and shifts and change and timeouts and all the rest of the things you do. You just sort of correct the system. But we do ultimately have to get to a place where there's not just some of us. And I'm not sure it just feels a long way off currently.
And I will.
But you have to work through the night. You just work when it's you have to work when the weather's not in your favor, and the weather's not totally in our favor right now. But
yeah,
but I'm also open to another view of it.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the part of what I see moving the envelope is when we have the humility to work with people who we don't agree with on everything. And I mean, on gun violence, one of our best allies right now, Doug, is like gun owners against assault weapons and hunters concerned about gun violence. These groups of gun owners that are deeply concerned about gun violence, and they can reach people that I'm not reaching. They're bringing new people into the movement. In states like Oklahoma, it's conservatives that are going to probably end up leading the way to the death penalty abolition. Folks like our friend Adam Luck, who was appointed by the governor, and yet out of his faith and his conscience, as he's looking at these cases, 10,000 cases he looked at, he said, our system's never going to be perfect. And so there comes a point where you go, when it comes to like the death penalty, do we ever want, like, is there a certain percentage rate that like you're willing to sacrifice, right? Yeah. And he just said,
0%.
and I also believe in mercy. I believe in redemption. So I'm never going to vote for the death penalty. So but he has so much integrity now. He's creating great conversations. Adam is with conservative legislators, and so I think that takes a lot of courage. And he kind of lost his job over that, but it also is a reminder too that we aren't going to move forward together without just kind of staying in our silos too. I think we've got to be finding some ways that we can work together, and that's why the Poor People's Movement is the Poor People's Campaign is a entire movement of fusion, right? Bringing people together out of a common concern for the intersections of these issues. Yeah, man.
Well, buddy, I love you and so glad for this work, and I just think as somebody who wants to be a change agent in the world, I'm all into like, let's change the world. But I'm not sure our call first is to change the world. I think it's to love the world and then to act in ways that could bring about more love in the world. And when that requires change, then we do change. And when it requires, more of something that already exists, we do that. And so really change is a tactic toward a larger outcome. And it would just be, it's good to be in a movement fueled by some, in our world, we call it the common good. That you can be fueled by something that's common and good. And when people ask, which they do all the time, well, what's good? You're like, well, that's a really ancient question, isn't it? Why do you call me good? And what's right? That's one of the questions that's been asked for a long time. And you probably know. And if you're not sure, well, there's a little bit of work for you to do about what's good. And if you start with what you know is good, pretty good. You probably have enough work to do just right there. You don't always have to. You don't have to definition everything because you just know, and you know what's good. And talking to you, Shane Clairborne, is good. And Yabitz
love it, dude.
Says so as well. All right. Anything else you got going on you want people to know about to make sure they get something? You got Anything
Oh,
happening?
I don't know. People are in Philly. Come visit our shop. We're beating guns into garden tools, and I got one right here. I just finished my shovel. So we're having open shop once a month now. I think it's also therapeutic, Doug. Like you can beat on
Yeah,
the
very.
barrel of an AR-15, and we're declaring all things can be made new. So if you're in Philly, come hang out, or I'll see you somewhere, probably with
Right on.
Doug along the way.
Probably somewhere. Okay. All right, buddy. Thanks so much.
All right, man.
Hey, y'all.
Yep.
We'll see you. We'll talk to you all tomorrow. Talking about economics and stuff. See you in the morning tomorrow sometime.